Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
But God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding. His church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Podcast. I'm Gabe Lyons, and we're so glad you're with us today. I know summer is up on us. It's getting close. School's getting out in some parts of the country. Spring's in the air. Summer's upon us. And this summer, we're going to have a lot of great conversations coming to you through this podcast. And we're so glad you're a part of this. I know listening to podcasts, it is becoming a little more of a routine for so many people. We want to keep the Q Podcast as just a staple in your week where you're hearing a great talk that sometimes is as short as 9 minutes, like the one today, but that encourages you, educates you a little bit, helps you understand some things going on in the world that maybe you wouldn't have had time to read about or think much about. But because you're subscribing to this, because you're listening and you're part of this community, you're getting to hear and be aware and informed and know how to best engage some of the difficult conversations coming. And so today's going to be no different. We're going to be talking about our cities, our communities. What does it look like to be a healing force in our cities, especially when tragedy strikes? We're finding in so many of our cities today, there are these moments that seem to kind of outsize what's happened in a city before. It could be natural disasters, as we'll talk about today. It could also be a crisis. It could be a school shooting. It could be any number of things that are happening that requires communities to bond together quickly. And we want to talk about the ingredients of that. Like, how do you really bond a community together quickly? What do you have to be doing before the event happens in order to ensure you can add value in the moment of crisis? But before we get into that, I also want to let you know, as our community, as those who listen to this faithfully, that there's an incredible opportunity that only comes around once a year for you to help communicate to the best and the brightest in your family. Maybe they're a student that's a part of your church or your community, somebody you've worked with or mentored over time, and that is for them to be one of our few Q Fellows that come and move here to Franklin, Tennessee, and they spend a year with us in this environment. They get a job, they're working with us, they're on the team, they have very specific responsibilities, but probably more important than that is they're in an environment where we're trying to cultivate and encourage their hearts, their minds, their ability to have a new perspective on what their role might be as they engage culture. And after 1 year, they get sent back out. And so we have a lot of people who come here the first year after they've graduated from college, as some graduates have experienced just recently in the last few weeks. And this becomes a great year for them to really invest in something that's a part of something much bigger than maybe they've been a part of before, but also learning very specific skill sets in the area where they already have talents. And so if you want to learn more about that program, you can go to qideas.org/QFellows. And when you go there, you can get all the information about how the program works, as well as the specific jobs that we have over the next year that we're looking for talented individuals to be a part of. Now, as we continue on today, I want to introduce this topic of healing cities by letting you know about the two different people that we're going to talk to today in this short 9-minute conversation that I had with them most recently at our latest Q 2018 event. It's Rob Peabody and Chris Seay. And what you need to know about both of these gentlemen is they're coming at healing cities from two very different perspectives. One is somebody who is on the ground in Houston, Texas. And as you know, Houston, Texas just suffered one of the greatest hurricanes with Hurricane Harvey that devastated the city. We all saw the images. We saw the pictures. We saw the helicopters coming in for rescues. I think over 13,000 people rescued from helicopter rescues. I mean, just an amazing statistic. But what you don't understand is what it would have been like to be a pastor in the heart of that city, seeing this coming, and then knowing that your church needs to be a part of the response, but maybe not quite knowing how that's going to work out. Well, you're going to get to hear from Chris Seay. He's the pastor at Ecclesia, right in the heart of Houston, an amazing church and an amazing community. Chris comes from generations of pastors, and he's been the type of leader who's been a part of Q from the very beginning, who's really jumped into imagining what would the church look like in a city? What would a church look like in a neighborhood? Not just as a place where people might come for a Sunday morning service, but more importantly, every other day of the week. And so they've imagined this space, and if you could just go visit their space on Taft Street in Houston. If you're ever through Houston, you got to go because it's open every day. And part of what the church is trying to do is be a source of light and love and encouragement to the community. Not only do they have a coffee shop that is rated in the top 3 in Houston, but they also have an organic farmers market that you can participate in on the weekends. They've got an art gallery and studio. They've basically created space where people can come and peruse books and have conversations. Just a really unique contribution to their neighborhood and to their community. But in addition to that, Chris has always had a heart and a vision for being a renewing force in the city. What we believe the gospel does when the church shows up, not just for services or for equipping on a Sunday, but what does it look like when they show up during the week? And so his church was called upon to show up probably bigger than they've ever been called upon to show up. And it's amazing when you hear what they were able to do and how they were able to respond. But secondly, you're going to hear from Rob Peabody. And Rob's somebody I really want you to know because Rob is somebody who has been a church planter in the past, but decided church planting wasn't the only way he could affect being the church. And God gave him a vision for something you're going to hear more about called VOMO, V-O-M-O. And in that vision, it was a way for churches and organizations to start to get the volunteers and the people in their midst that have a heart to be mobilized. It was a tool through an app on the phone to help them become mobilized. Very simple idea. It's one of the ideas, as you know, that the simpler they are, the better they work. And VOMO has become one of those simple ideas that quickly over the last year has started to gain traction in multiple cities. Many organizations are using them. The federal government's starting to use this. And here it was, a church planter who had this idea, partnered with some other investors and said, let's go create something that would allow the church and allow people in general to be mobilized to show up for any need that's happening in their community. Now, you know, for us at Q, this is important. Part of the mission is to advance good. Lots of times in our heart, we want to advance good. We just don't always know where to show up. Who needs help? How could we show up? And so the heart's in the right place, but practically and functionally, we don't know how to do it. And that's what I love about what Rob's doing. And so let's listen into this conversation, hear more about what happened as one church responds to Hurricane Harvey, but also hear from Rob what they're experiencing by using technology to advance good in our cities. Let's listen in now. So Chris, sixth generation pastor in Houston, you guys got just smothered with rain in late August, and absolutely the entire city basically goes underwater. Your church has been faithfully serving in the area, but tell us what that was like the moment you kind of realized this isn't just another like hurricane warning, this is serious.
Yeah, well, if you live on the Gulf Coast, you've seen some of this stuff before, but this storm was different. And if you know much about the storm, or some of you, I just got to say to start, all the good news I get to share with you, a lot of it happens because of partners and pastors and churches in this room. So I'm just so proud to be a part of the church. When things go down, you find out who your friends are, and your friends move towards you in crisis, not away from you. And when you're a part of the church, you got a lot of friends. And so that was the real gift. We'd never seen a storm quite like this hit a city. Houston's the 4th largest city in the United States. And so when so much of your city's underwater, the sheer volume of people, it's still overwhelming for people. I'll run into people here and they'll be like, there's still work to do. And you're like, you just have no clue. You just have no, I don't even know how to express it. I'm an Enneagram 8. So in these moments, I just feel like I know in my body what to do. And so we just got after it. We told churches across the country, we need your help. We need the things we can't get. So you sent us dehumidifiers and fans and all the things we needed to help people clean up. And we said, we need you to come. And people started coming. So we converted one of our campuses into what I call Hotel Jesus. We sleep 60 people there every night. We had about 50 there last night, but they got construction skills. If you can't hang sheetrock, we don't want you. But if you can, we would love to see you. And if you have any of those skills, we had another campus that is a big warehouse we were ready to build out, and we had some things happen with it. And so World Vision took it over. And we've been able to renovate it so that World Vision they've been the best partner. I'm just telling you, the best partner. And they brought in the supplies that we need to rebuild homes for people that don't have the money to rebuild on their own. So sheetrock, refrigerators, air conditioners, you name it. We turned it around in about 2.5 weeks. We opened it with a big ribbon cutting right in the days that my Astros won the World Series. And and they brought in $4 million worth of supplies for us in the weeks since the storm to be able to help people that desperately need it.
Well, I love hearing how the church responds in these moments. You were doing an incredible job communicating through the middle of that and leading so well, and it speaks to, I think, so many of the relationships you've invested in for so many years personally. Rob, you have a pretty incredible story, but for the sake of time, you currently have founded something that I have found fascinating in our conversations about cities. We know that cities and our neighborhoods and our ability to love our neighbors well becomes one of the great ways to show hospitality, one of the great ways God's mission happens on this earth. And he gave you this idea about how to use technology for good. I know we ask people to put their phones in their places, but you said you had an idea of how phones could actually be a part of how we respond to crises like this, how we mobilize quickly. Describe for us VOMO and what you created.
Yeah, so originally VOMO wasn't for disaster relief. It was to mobilize the church to go be the church outside the walls, right?
Yep.
And connect all these people who want to do good but have an ignorance barrier and don't know how do I actually go do this. But we had just built it, and we're watching CNN, Anderson Cooper's on there, and they interview the guy who's in charge of all the cleanup efforts and recovery, and he says, what we need on national TV, what we need is a disruptive technology solution, and he goes, something like Google would make, that connects all these needs with real humans to meet them. And I was like, holy cow. So I grab the phone, we film it, and we start tweeting it out, and it's like God had given us this technology for such a time as this. So within 3 days, we had 55,000 projects up on VOMO and had churches.
Tell us, so for those who haven't heard of VOMO, it's an app.
Oh yeah.
And essentially it's an app that allows organizations or people to put up projects and to connect volunteers to those projects, almost like Instagram feed.
Yeah. So it's a free app and web platform and just connects all those tangible, real, physical needs to people to go meet them.
Yeah.
And so we work now with universities and businesses and churches. And so when that happened with Harvey, we actually saw 1,200 Texas A&M students just signing up on VOMO and going down there every week to be a part of the recovery process, and they're still doing it today. So
Such a great idea. I want to talk a little bit more of it in a second. But Chris, for a lot of the leaders in this room, they've hosted Q Commons like over the last 3 years. They're starting to develop all kinds of great networks and relationships in their cities around this idea of advancing good news, as David said. Talk about the importance of building those kinds of relationships before the crisis happens.
Yeah, well, there's so much about, and the reality is because of global warming, because of violence, whether it's a school shooting, whether it's police brutality, whether it's a natural disaster, a disaster is coming to your city at some point. And I think one of the important things I would emphasize is that when you're a church leader, when you're a Christian leader, one of the things going for is you have to have a love for your city. Like I'm made for Houston. It's a long story, but I ended up starting a church in my hometown in Houston because I got invited to Atlanta to consult, and they offered me a job to pastor in Atlanta. And instantly I said, I hate the Braves. I can't pastor a church in Atlanta, right? But I said, but I love the Astros, and I knew like it's time to go home. And when you have a disaster, it's a little bit like when your kid gets sick and vomits on you. Like you'll take it from your kid, but you won't take it from somebody else. Like if Gabe throws up on me, I'm not in with it, right? But with my kid, I can clean him up. I can do whatever I need to do. And when you love your city, you just do whatever you have to do for your city, and you'll take the hard things. And what we've learned in Houston, if your church wasn't missional before the storm, if people weren't engaged, those churches, they didn't know what to do during the storm. So if you're not already out caring for the community, knowing your neighbors, engaged with people, caring for the homeless, if those things aren't happening, the kind of hospitality we're talking about today, our church runs a restaurant where if you're working poor, if you're homeless, you can come eat an amazing meal every day for $1. And we just have this huge network of people that are already serving and giving. So it's just natural that in the days after the storm, we'd have thousands of people just instantly respond to the need. So I would say you'll be the church that you are. It's just going to be under a microscope when the storm comes. And the reality is wherever you live, the storm will come. So I'd say love the city, lean in, build those relationships, and then know I'm going to be ready one day. when something goes wrong, we're going to be that kind of church. We're going to step forward.
What has the response been to the church in Houston since the storm and after serving in that way?
It's amazing. I would not wish this storm, obviously, upon our city or any other city. But when you get to love, the way that Dave described earlier, you get to love people to radical kind of hospitality. One of the neighborhoods I would go into, your churches sent us like 800 dehumidifiers in the 3 weeks after the storm. And they came to us and they went out to people, things you couldn't get. You needed those things bad to dry your houses out. So there's one neighborhood I just kept driving them to, right? And I'd go set it up in people's houses and we'd muck their house out. One of them had painted a sign out front of their neighborhood. They said, Ecclesia, the name of the church I pastor, is our FEMA, right? And these people in this community, we bring in grocery cards. Our church got to do about $250,000 worth of grocery cards. Because when you clean out somebody's house, you know how much food they had. Zero. Their pantries were empty. And when you get to do that, so this Easter, I bet we had 5, 6, 7, 800 people show up. That were people that came back and said, you mucked out our house. I was at a restaurant last week, and the lady said, I have to buy your lunch. You mucked out my parents' house. Your church came and took care of us. And so everywhere I go, there's this sense of goodwill that the church is who it's supposed to be.
So beautiful. Rob, on what you created with VOMO, explain a little bit about how many people are starting to use that. Because there's so many church leaders and organizations, even colleges. I mean, this is not just a Christian app, right? Because Christian can't be a good adjective. It's an app, and it's designed to help people serve and get connected. We know a lot of younger generation folks are wanting to serve, get their hands dirty,
right? But
they don't always know how to find the opportunities. That's what I found so fascinating about what you've created.
Yeah, they want to do good, but don't know where to start. And 85% of Americans own a smartphone. We look at it 2,600 times a day.
Right.
So how do we leverage this cultural moment where your congregation, your friends, they're staring at the screen all day long and use that for redemptive purposes to advance the kingdom? And so we've got 70,000 projects on VOMO in all the major cities across the U.S., but we also have the ability for you to add your own projects. So a lot of small groups are adding stuff on there because they know the needs better than we do as pastoral staff. And so empowering the laity and the church leadership to build this economy of meeting needs.
And if you and your family have time Saturday morning at 10 a.m. to volunteer, and you're like, I want to do that, our family needs to volunteer, you can look through in your city and see where you could volunteer and just sign up. I mean, that's
exactly.
So
you just
simple.
work through the filters.
If you want to check that out, I'd encourage you to do it through the App Store. You can also go to VOMO.
Yeah, VOMO.org.
Yeah, well, thank you, Rob, for going with the idea that God put in your heart to do. It's amazing how it came along right when there was this need, and now it's going really big all over the world. So thank you for that. Let's thank Chris. Let's thank Rob for just leading well in our cities. Thank you, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing these two men describe these stories and describe how God's called each of them, maybe in different ways, to be a part of what God's heart is, which is to restore things back to their original design and for us to participate in it. And so if you're listening, I think as you heard Rob talk about, VOMO is an idea every single one of us can get involved in, and it's simple and it's free. You simply go to an app store on Android, iPhone, wherever you get your apps, and download VOMO, V-O-M-O. Movement for Good is their tagline, and I want every listener to think about doing that. It costs you nothing except 1 minute, put in that password, download your app. Once you have that and you select your city, you're then able to see any opportunities around you. And for some of you who have children like I do, it can be really easy on VOMO to look and say, hey, this Saturday afternoon, I want my family to go do something where we're serving in the community. And through the app, you can actually go look and see what are the 3 hours of a window that you have in your town, in your community, where maybe you could serve. But the second use of that's very practical, I think, for many of you listening. If you're an administrator at a school, if you're running a business or an organization, if you're a pastor in a church or responsible for volunteerism in any way, I think considering putting your opportunities for volunteerism on this app is a really great way for you to communicate with your people and for these opportunities to become more accessible for them. So they have a whole special pricing, and I think they're running specials even right now for churches who would be listening to this and businesses. So check that out and consider whether that's a platform you could use to better disseminate information. You know, we feel like today, I think, in our world that there's so much access to information and overflow, and we're overwhelmed by it, that people must know of the opportunities. But I think all of that has created so much distraction. We don't always know anymore easily how to participate in things that maybe in our heart we'd like to participate in. I think VOMO kind of cuts through that and can help with that. For those of you, as you heard Chris talk about, there's still teams going to Houston. There's still need there. There's still work to be done. So if you're interested at all in being a part of what's happening in Houston, whether you have some skills or talents, or you like to just get in there and work for a week, or you want to take a trip and take some people into the heart of a place that's still needing that kind of repair and that kind of work done, then email us at info@qideas.org and we'll get you connected with Chris and his team, and maybe you guys can work out a way to participate together. I think the bottom line, though, is for us at Q, is when our cities are in a struggle, when there's a need, we ought to be some of the most creative people in addressing those. We need to have the best solutions. We need to know where to point. And so you've heard a little bit about how you can do that today. But another thing that we can do proactively is we can be building the community of Christians in our city who actually care about the common good, who realize this is a Christian responsibility. And when this moment comes, if we haven't built some of those relationships, then we're often not able to show up with the strength in the way that we ought to show up. And so through Q, as you know, if you've been listening to this podcast over the last 3 years, we've created a way to bring cities and neighborhoods together. It's called Q Commons, and we would love for you to participate this October 25th in Q Commons. There's a few ways you can do that. You can bring Q Commons to your city, and essentially what you're doing is you're creating a 2-hour structured evening where we're going to have talks that are live, we're going to have talks that are broadcast to you, we're going to have conversation guides where you're able to have conversations with the people assembling in your rooms, and this will be happening in living rooms that have 6 people in them, all the way to 1,000 people showing up in a church and everything in between. But on that particular night, tens of thousands of people are going to gather in cities all over the U.S., all over the world. They're going to gather on college campuses as college students. And people are going to come together for this one evening to ask the question, how can we be a witness to what Christian love looks like in our communities and in our cities? It's an incredible opportunity and a tool to bring people together and connect people so that we can actually do the kinds of good work that we know deep in our hearts we're convicted to do, but don't often know who to do it with or how to do it best. And so join us for Q Commons. If you're interested in that, right now, over these next couple of weeks is the perfect time to let us know of your interest. You can just go to qcommons.com. That's QCOMMONS, qcommons.com. And you can just submit a form that lets us know you're interested for your church, maybe having it in your church, privately hosting it for the people of your church, or maybe you're called to pull together leaders from all around your city in more of a public venue. We have a way for you to do that. And for some of you, it might be, I just want to bring people together in my living room. I'm going to invite a few neighbors over for a meal and an intentional conversation on Thursday night, October 25th. Whatever it is that you feel like is the right way for you to participate. Please join us and go to qcommons.com and let us know that you're interested in doing that, and we'll be in touch with you shortly to talk about the next steps. Well, I hope you have a great week. We look forward to continuing these conversations on a weekly basis, continuing to learn together and get exposed to the amazing ways God's using people, ordinary people, to do these extraordinary things because of their availability, their desire to respond, and their desire to just be faithful right where God's called them. So I hope you have that kind of week, and we'll look forward to talking again in the days ahead.